Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. This is Barry Jones with sphistory.com, Standards Plus History. Today we are looking at the third installment of the Making the Case for CIA Involvement in the JFK assassination. On day one, we examined the ZR rifle program and the CIA's program to assassinate not a foreign unfriendly leader, but an American target, and all the CIA in-house recruiting to carry out that program. On day two, which was yesterday, we looked at all of the myriad of connections, people from Alan Dulles on down that had involvement in what happened at Dealey Plaza, from the S-Force, and obviously the the cover story that was prepared by David Atlee Phillips, and all the different connecting points and people involved. Of course, they're all traceable back to the CIA. And today we're going to examine the world reaction to the assassination, which has always interested me, and who the world thought did it in the immediate aftermath. It's amazing to me how the rest of the world glommed onto the truth pretty quick, and the Americans, in search of reassurance from their government, bought the cover story. It's it's pretty incredible. Um, Also, we're going to look at the payoffs. I started off. We're looking at five conspirators, and this is the first conspirator, the deep state, and we define the deep state as the national security apparatus and the corporations that feed it. We spent about a week looking at the corporate uh, system and how it bled its way into the national security apparatus and government, ultravires and all that. And then we've spent the last week or so looking at the Joint Chiefs and now the CIA. So this is the national security apparatus. And I told you at the outset that I wanted to answer three questions. Now, these three questions are not original with me. Oliver Stone put them right in his movie. And he said, when you're looking at this crime, this investigating it, you're trying to answer three questions. Why was JFK killed? Who benefited? And who had the power to cover it up? And of course, who had the power to cover it? That the immunity part of this whole equation is really important. You don't go into an assassination or something of this nature without having the end of it covered. You got to make sure you're going to be immunized from any responsibility or any accountability when it's all over. And of course, the conspiracy in this case had that part covered. And we'll discuss that with each one of these conspirators, their part to play in that. And so we're going to look at that. Why was JFK killed? Why or who benefited today as well? So let's get right into it. The question of the day is the same question we've been answering for the last 2 days. What is the case for CIA involvement in the JFK assassination? This is part three. The reason this is the same question is because you're going to see as we go through this, all of the world agrees it was the CIA who did it. All of the world except us, of course. This is a picture here at top of Charles de Gaulle in a motorcade. This is his version of an open top limousine. The motorcade in Dallas, JFK rode in. There was an actual bubble top that you'd fix to the top of the car, and in this case, they just kind of cut the roof out. He stands up. There is no bubble top, but they cut the roof out, and he stands up in the middle of it. this is the lesson that the conspirators learn in the Paris attempt. And if you recall, Charles de Gaulle, in the aftermath of an assassination attempt, in the investigation, learns that the American CIA was involved in the attempt on his life as well. And this is in March or April of 1961, the same month Bay of Pigs happened. So he confronts JFK, the new president, says, hey, I know you got a lot on your plate right now with Bay of Pigs and stuff. He says, but you might want to know that your CIA just tried to kill me. They were conspiring with my generals against me. They're mad about Algeria and my efforts to pull out of Algeria, and so that they wanted to kill me. And your CIA was involved. He goes, first of all, I'd like to know if you sanctioned this, and if so, why? What's going on? And of course, JFK was befuddled, didn't know anything about it, checked into it, found out it was true, apologized profusely, and told Charles de Gaulle, evidently, I'm not in control of my own government, it appears. So the lesson that they learned was in this motorcade where they tried to kill him, it was almost a verbatim setup as Dallas. And the lesson that they learned was it's not good enough for him just to be in the car and you shoot at the car in the direction of Charles de Gaulle. You need him, you need the top off, you need him standing through the top of the car like you have here, where he's completely exposed and he has no protection, because in this case, Charles de Gaulle was protected. You can see in the bottom picture, they're pointing out bullet damage to the inside of the car, but the car actually saved his life. He was sitting down in the seat, and when the hail of bullets came, the car was built sturdy enough to save his life. And of course, they vamoosed out of the motorcade and got out of there. It's something our driver didn't do. And so, the lesson that they learned is, if you're going to kill a leader, a world leader in a motorcade, you need him looking like he is in the top picture, standing out through the hole in the roof, or like in Dallas, you need him in an open top car with the bubble top removed. In other words, you need his protection stripped away. And because otherwise these cars, they're built like tanks. If you don't hit it just right, perfectly, the car itself is going to save the life of your target. So in the immediate aftermath of JFK's assassination, we have a situation in Cuba where Fidel Castro is meeting with back channels for JFK, representing JFK. There's a picture of the hotel room. Castro's in the background. And Gene Daniels in that room. Remember Howard, the ABC News reporter, Lisa Howard, is in that room. She's sprawled across the two beds there. And they are bringing to Castro the latest information that they've received from Kennedy, that Kennedy wants Castro to hear, and they're going to take back to Kennedy any message that Castro has for him. These are the emissaries in between, the intermediaries. And this is the rapprochement that JFK is involved in, trying to back channel a settlement between the United States and Cuba, recognize the government, establish or reestablish diplomatic relations, economic ties, et cetera. Well, Castro, when he hears the news, it literally is happening at the same time. They're meeting as the assassination happens. And he tells the people in the room, he says, quote, "You watch and see, I know them. They will try to put the blame on us, the communists, for this thing." So then when the radio report said that a man named Lee Harvey Oswald had been arrested and that he was married to a Russian, Castro replied, quote, "There, didn't I tell you? It'll be my turn next." And according to Lisa Howard, William Atwood's also involved in this negotiation. Neglected to mention his name. Minutes later, the radio reports that Oswald had been a Castro admirer, and he had started a chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Castro then turns to Gene Daniel and he asks, what authority does LBJ exercise over the CIA? That is Castro sort of revealing to Gene Daniel and those others in the room whom he thinks is responsible for the assassination. He immediately, just like Bobby Kennedy, he immediately goes to the CIA. And his question is, what about this new president? What's his relationship with the CIA? It's his first query. How about the Soviet Union? Khrushchev, who had, when Khrushchev had first met Kennedy at Vienna, he had his way with him. And he came away from that thinking Kennedy was going to be a pushover. But then we'd had a Cuban, the situation in Berlin with the wall and the standoff there with the tanks. And then a little while later, about a year later, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. They established a back channel, began negotiating directly for a nuclear test ban treaty. And Khrushchev had grown to admire Kennedy and realized that he had a partner for peace that was willing to stand up to the hardliners in his government, just like Khrushchev was standing up to the hardliners back home in the Soviet Union. And so they had big plans going forward. If you ever read the book that Khrushchev's son wrote or listen to any interviews, and he talks about his dad's intentions going forward if Kennedy had lived. And boy, this world would have been a completely different place if both of these guys remained in power. That's the little known secret here in America. Yeah, we all know about Kennedy. Khrushchev paid a price too. Khrushchev ended up less than a year later being run out of the government, and Brezhnev had him basically put under house arrest and became a quote non-person. The Soviets ruled that he was a non-person, such that when he died, he wasn't even given a state funeral or allowed to be buried with any kind of honors at all. And today he's buried at some nondescript graveyard, as if he never happened. The hardliners overcame and won the day and replaced Khrushchev with Brezhnev. And basically, his punishment was they treated him like his government had never happened. And he died sort of a broken man. So that all happened within a year of JFK being assassinated. So here's these two world leaders trying for peace. Bad things happen to both of them because there's hardliners in both governments that don't want peace. Anyway, so Khrushchev has come to respect Kennedy, and he broke down and he sobbed. He cried. And you just don't expect that kind of a response from somebody. It wasn't that long ago, Nikita Khrushchev was standing in front of the UN, pounding on the pulpit with his shoe, yelling to anyone who will listen about the West, "We will bury you. We will bury you." He's come a long way. Now he one of his best friends in government service, in one of the, as far as world leaders are concerned, is JFK. It's pretty fascinating, actually. For several days, he was just basically catatonic. He didn't do anything. He just kind of muttered around and stared off into space. He told his biographer, William Taubman, that he was convinced, quote, Kennedy was killed by militaristic forces in Washington, bent on sabotaging the two leaders' efforts to reach détente. The question next is, will they now launch a nuclear strike on the Soviet Union? See, that Kennedy was his best hope. Kennedy was a deterrent. Kennedy was he was the restraint on the hardliners in the United States. And of course, the Soviets, as we found out later, we always thought the Soviets were on the verge of attacking us. Turns out throughout most of the Cold War, the Soviets were hyper paranoid that we were going to attack them. And this is what happens in a Cold War where there's no communication. This is why Kennedy and Khrushchev are trying to back channel, because like this is ridiculous. This idea that we can't communicate. So we just imagine the worst about you, and you imagine the worst about me, and we're paranoid to begin with. That's just a recipe for disaster. So, they're back to wondering. During Kennedy's short time in office, they kind of felt reassured. This guy's not gonna. He's had several chances. He's not done it. He stood up to the hardliners in his own government. And so they felt a lot of reassurance when Kennedy was president. And now they're back to wondering, because LBJ, he's not Kennedy. And it's not going to take him long to realize LBJ is in somebody's pocket. So to reassure Khrushchev, Jackie sends a letter. It's a copy of it here on the left. And in the letter, she says, quote, "Please tell Mr. Chairman, President, that I know he and my husband work together for a peaceful world." And in that letter, by the way, that communication, the original communication she and Bobby sent, she tells Khrushchev, she goes, "We know you didn't do it. We know it wasn't you. We know it was a political assassination from some group here at home." And so she's trying to ease his fears that we suspect that he was behind it. And now she's also trying to say, we know that you are a partner for peace with my husband. You're one of the good guys. So in a follow-up letter, she wrote another one to Khrushchev. She says, "The danger troubling my husband was that war could be started not so much by major figures as minor ones. Whereas major figures understand the need for self-control and restraint, minor ones are sometimes moved by fear and pride." We've discussed this, William Harvey, for example, went off the reservation while JFK and Khrushchev were back channeling, trying to negotiate peace through the missile crisis. Harvey's launching attacks in Cuba against Soviet targets, hoping that the Soviets will think it's Kennedy, that Kennedy authorized these, and they'll respond and force us to respond, and force them to respond, force us to respond. Next thing you know, we're in a nuclear war, or at least an invasion of Cuba. So that's what she's saying. She said, war can be started not so much by major figures, but by minor ones. How about William Pauley and the S-Force, launching their little raids and, using his yacht, launching these little raids. It's just everywhere they looked, it seemed like if you're the Kennedys, you're surrounded by these idiots. And I say idiots because they're not stupid. They're not dumb. They have an agenda. And but their agenda is not his agenda. But they don't care. They're willing to disobey and do whatever they want. And we heard it with the Joint Chiefs, the doomsday plan. Right now is the time to attack. Now is the time to annihilate Russia while we have the advantage. And Kennedy withstood that and got scorned for it. Ted Dealey said he's a coward. He's riding around on Caroline's tricycle, but he stood up to that. He's a major figure who understands the need for self-control and restraint, according to Jackie. But so did Khrushchev. Khrushchev did the same thing. And she's complimenting him. She's saying, you're just like my husband. You're a major figure. You understand the need for self-control and restraint. You know what a nuclear war would do. And my husband knew it. These idiots trying to cause all this, they evidently don't, or they don't care. And that's what she says, that was what was troubling my husband. And she's sort of commiserating with him because he's got the same troubles. So that's the Soviet reaction. So we've seen what Fidel Castro thought. That we see what Khrushchev thinks. That's the East. That's the communist world. All right. How about England, an ally? The Daily Mail, as the cover story is being dumped on the American people and around the world, the Daily Mail spoke of, quote, whispers that Oswald was a fall guy. And even the Daily Telegraph came out and questioned Dallas police chief's Curry's announcement that Oswald's death closed the case. And they said that's a, quote, monumental absurdity. And so in England, you're already getting whispers about, oh, Oswald, he might just be what he said he is. He's a patsy. And this rush to judgment by the American authorities, case is closed, Oswald's dead. They're calling that absurd, absolutely absurd. In Italy, the Corriere Lombardo proclaimed, quote, there was no way Oswald could have used the Mannlicher Carcano to squeeze off 3 shots in 6 seconds. This is an Italian rifle. They know a bad rifle when they see one. And the Mannlicher Carcano was a bad rifle. And there's no way with a bad rifle, a bad scope, as we found out, that you could squeeze off 3 shots with a bolt action rifle where it takes 2.1 seconds minimum just to recycle. And there's no way you can do that in 6 seconds. So you see a questioning taking place around the world that's not happening in America. In America, we're just accepting what we're being told. And of course, the Warren Commission is going to run with it as well. Back to France. These are some more photos of that same car. You can see it got shot up pretty good. The bottom picture shows bullet holes on the driver's side front. They're highlighted there. And then the top picture shows bullet damage to the back and the middle. He's riding through Paris in this motorcade, and they just come out guns blazing. But the car saved his life. So here's de Gaulle. And he says, quote, what happened to Kennedy is what nearly happened to me. He had been likewise targeted in a motorcade. And the only difference was he was inside the car, and Kennedy was inside the car, but he didn't have any protection, bubble top removed. He said his story is the same as mine. The security forces were in cahoots with the extremists. De Gaulle is onto something here. He's saying there's a extreme element in America that evidently has infiltrated into the security forces, plural. Security forces, plural. I find that very interesting, because if you're talking about the security forces, plural, you're not just talking about the CIA, you're talking about the FBI, you're talking about the Secret Service. And, Secret Service's job is to protect the president. FBI's job is to investigate the crime. And of course, the CIA, we found out, has their own assassination program here in America. So you put all 3 of these together, and that's what he's talking about, the security forces, and they're in cahoots with the extremists. Well, as we go forward, we're going to learn about these extremists. Most of them are anti-Castro Cuban types, but you got some Southerners who are mad about JFK's civil rights stance, John Birchers, right? Those are extremists. You've got some oil people in Texas that are mad about some of his economic policies that are going to affect them financially. Those are extremists. So you put those all together and you've got yourself a tempest in a teapot, so to speak. And that's what de Gaulle is saying. He returns from home from JFK's funeral in the U.S., and he's already, in his mind, solved the crime. He knows exactly what happened because it almost happened to him. So he's already investigated his own situation, and he sees all the similarities. And the American CIA was involved in his. He sees all the similarities. He's just like, those same people killed Kennedy. One of you commented recently and said that de Gaulle refused to walk or march or participate in the procession in JFK's funeral. And he got a lot of criticism for that, but it was like he knew something. And I didn't realize that. I didn't know that he had refused to participate in that way. But he went to the funeral, but evidently he didn't participate in the procession, where, if you remember, they all walked up I think it was Pennsylvania Boulevard, big boulevard there in the Capitol, in Washington, behind the caisson, the horse-drawn carriage, and the family, et cetera, et cetera. Evidently, de Gaulle said, "I'm not doing it." Like, he didn't know what was going to happen next, and he felt like the same people that had already assassinated JFK might target him again. You know, missed the first time, might get him the second time. And since they got away with it, or they're in the process of getting away with it here in America, they're still at large. So he didn't trust uh, the situation, so he just refused to walk in the procession. I don't know who told me that. It was in one of the comments. I'm just throwing that out there. I haven't even investigated it, or researched it. But anyway, maybe one of you knows more about that. But so that's de Gaulle. And he continues, he says, everything leads me to believe that Oswald was a front. The guy ran away because he probably got suspicious. They wanted to kill him on the spot before he could be grabbed by the judicial system. Unfortunately, it didn't happen exactly the way he had probably planned it would. But a trial, you realize, is just terrible. People would have talked. They would have dug up so much that they would have unearthed everything. Then the security services went looking for a cleanup man, a man they totally controlled and who couldn't refuse their offer. And that guy sacrificed himself to kill the fake assassin. Oh my goodness. Charles de Gaulle just solved the crime. Oswald's a front. He was supposed to be killed, and then they could blame a dead guy. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. And so they had to grab up Jack Ruby, and he was the cleanup man, and they controlled him, and he couldn't refuse their demand. So he went and sacrificed himself, killed the fake assassin. Now they can blame it on that guy. And this is where you see the, Chief Curry coming out saying, well, Oswald's dead. Crime, the crime has been solved. And this is where Nicholas Katzenbach, the Assistant Attorney General, is releasing a memo from the FBI, the Justice Department, basically saying the American people need to be convinced that Oswald acted alone. He did not have Confederates that are still at large, and that he would have been convicted at trial had he lived. And J. Edgar Hoover is releasing his memo. Lee Harvey, LBJ is talking about how JFK was killed by a lone assassin. And I mean, the fix is in immediately. And de Gaulle is all over this. He's all over this. He says that security services all over the world are the same when they do this kind of dirty work. As soon as they succeed in wiping out the fake assassin, they declare that the judicial system no longer be concerned, that no further public action is needed now because the guilty perpetrator is dead. I don't think that I really need to say anything about this. He's right on target here. He's speaking truth. De Gaulle is. Look what he says about the American people and America in general. Kind of identifies this period as a crossroads moment in American history. He says America is in danger of upheavals, but you'll see, all of them together will observe the law of silence. They'll close ranks. They'll do everything to stifle a scandal. They will throw Noah's cloak over these shameful deeds in order to not lose face in front of the whole world, in order to not risk unleashing riots in the U.S., in order to preserve the Union, to avoid a new civil war, in order to not ask themselves questions. They don't want to know. They don't want to find out. They won't allow themselves to find out. All of these quotes I've been giving you come from his memoir, 2002, C'est de Gaulle. It was de Gaulle. That was the I'm sure I didn't say that right, but the translation, the name of the book is It Was de Gaulle. This was published by Elaine Perifite. I'm sure I didn't say that right either. Uh, he was the French information minister under de Gaulle. So de Gaulle is speaking to his information minister, and and his information minister is taking down these quotes, recording them to be used later in de Gaulle's memoir. So he's basically just talking about what he thinks happened and where that leaves America. And I highlighted and put in red what he said about our lack of inquisitiveness or intellectual curiosity. Uh, they don't want to know. They don't want to find out. They won't allow themselves to find out. I got another question yesterday in the comments about the about education, whether there's any research going on in the educational community into the JFK assassination. Honestly, I don't know of any. I don't know of any. When you think about research and all the different topics that are available to be researched, all the PhD uh, people that are candidates in the PhD programs across the country, or history professors or researchers that work for university systems, whatever, uh, even media, academic journals, whatever. You would think the JFK assassination is just ripe for research. But, research is based on, uh, the community of researchers. They're trying to get published. That's the whole point of it. If you're a university professor, you want to get tenure, you got to get published. So you do your research on something that you can get published in. So you end up just kind of scratching the hand that feeds you. You just find out, okay, what do these publishers want? And then you do research. It's probably the 9,000th research project on the same topic. Meanwhile, the real stuff, the real meat and potatoes sits there and never gets examined because you can't get published. I have found this out myself, when I wrote several books about this topic, and I would send it off to publishers. My goodness, it's like crickets. You don't hear anything. No one's interested. Not if you're writing about it from a conspiracy perspective. And the only way they are interested is if you're a big name and you already have an established audience, right? So they can at least make some money off you. But as far as research is concerned, nobody wants to go against the conventional wisdom, or whatever the official version is. And a publisher that's why you get these books written by people like Judith Very and Ed Haslam and even James Files. They have to be written. They have to be published by these sort of maverick publishers that are, have small budgets, and the books look kind of, cheap because they're doing what they can, the small budgets that they have, that they're allowed, because they're presenting a side that nobody wants to publish. Nobody wants that side. Nobody wants to. But you have your some. David Talbot's a mainstream guy, and he's done some really good research on this. And we talked about Mary Haverstick the last couple of days, and her book, A Woman I Know. There are, but these are all independent people. These are all independent researchers or citizen journalists, people like you and I who are doing our own research. But as far as the research community that you think of when you think of research, I just don't know of any, because again, like de Gaulle said, they don't want to know. They don't want to find out, and they won't allow themselves to find out, even though it's been 60 years. Everyone who was involved is pretty much dead. And all of the evidence that has emerged in the last 55 years, probably 59 years, has been in the direction of conspiracy. None of it has supported the lone gunman theory that the government wants everybody to believe. So that's why if you open textbooks today, you still get the Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. It's just preposterous. But that's what our textbook I got a stack of textbooks sitting right over there. That's what they say. And the whole JFK assassination, the entire episode, I'm on episode 79 right now. Each one's been about an hour. Sometimes I've gone over, sometimes under. Let's just say an hour each. That's 79 hours so far. And we're not finished. That would be the equivalent of about a semester's worth of material. A year in a school year is 180 days. We're approaching 90 days of, and that's if I just lectured like I have been with these every day. And of course, everybody knows in school that's not what happens. So I've got a semester's worth at the very minimum. By the time we're finished, I'll have a year's worth of material on YouTube. And you go pick up that textbook over there. They have one little paragraph, JFK assassination. Like it's just a blip in history. It changed everything. You can't even understand current history. You can't understand the Cold War. You can't understand Watergate. You can't understand the presidents and the control that the deep state has over that. You can't understand anything today if you don't understand what happened in 63. You can't understand anything. And of course, it impacted MLK being shot, Bobby being shot. And the textbook has one little paragraph on it. When I was a history major in college. And then in my master's, I was exclusively history. The JFK assassination, we barely touched it. I took that one class in Watergate. And that's what got me started in this, but they weren't looking into JFK either. It was Watergate. And what got me interested in this was that the professor could not answer the question, why would Nixon do it? So I did my own research and discovered that Nixon got, paranoid about Watergate because of who was involved in it and how it tied back to 63. It all goes back to the JFK assassination. And I've gone through 4 years of undergrad, 2 years of master's level classes, and some other classes in addition to all that. And we've barely touched the JFK assassination. I think de Gaulle is right. We don't want to know. We don't want to find out. We won't allow ourselves to find out. And so we just lap up, and I say we, obviously it's not us. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching this and I wouldn't be doing this. But generally speaking, Americans have just lapped up the story. And that's why the textbook companies get away with that. And so, boy, de Gaulle's words, really damning. All right, so to our first question of the day, which is why was JFK killed by this deep state cabal? And I hope by this point in this series of Conspirator One episodes that I've been able to show motive by both the Joint Chiefs and the CIA. And of course, we talked earlier about the FBI and its role in the cover-up, mishandling of all the evidence and steering people to the lone gunman conclusion. So I've not recovered that, but I include the FBI in this deep state discussion. But and so the question is, why was JFK killed? And so we've gone over all of this, but I just want to put it on one slide in a sort of a chronological order. You can see I went by dates, and I just ticked off all the different things that these two entities that are part of the national security apparatus could not abide by. They could not tolerate. You can see here in my slide, I've drawn an arrow, and they say, in the view of the Joint Chiefs and the CIA, by the time we get to November of 63, they don't view JFK as a Cold Warrior. He ran as a Cold Warrior, but he has changed, and he's become a warrior for peace. And so now he's the real danger in their view. And so, the way they handle danger if you look at the the military, you're talking about guys like Curtis LeMay, is they kill the danger. The CIA, the way they handle foreign threats or unfriendlies is they launch covert operations against them. They kill them. They take them out. They assassinate them. So why would this be any different? The only difference is he's our leader, but in their view, he's the real danger. Their hands are tied as long as he's alive. So you look at this list here. It's quite a list. He was only president 1,000 days, but 61 he announces the bases that are closing, 73 military bases. April, a month later, Bay of Pigs. Same month, he fires an icon, General Walker, and we found out that General Walker was only doing what the Joint Chiefs basically blessed him to do or authorized him to do. Then June of 61, he issues National Security Action Memos 55, 56, 57, stripping away a lot of the CIA power and authority to do covert ops, transferring it to the Joint Chiefs who are under his control. Then he has that summit meeting in Vienna with Khrushchev where he gets knocked around pretty good, admits it later. Then in July, he nixes the Doomsday Plan, the Joint Chiefs and the CIA director bring to him. And he gets up, storms out. So they know he's not going to ever authorize a preemptive strike, which is something that they've wanted. Then we had the Berlin Wall, and he does nothing to stop that. He gives that speech at University of North Carolina in 60. A lot of there's 3 speeches I'm going to reference, and you could tell in his speeches he's progressively moving in the direction. And he's verbalizing, he's kind of like thinking out loud, and he's verbalizing the direction he's heading, which is towards peace and towards accepting the Russian people as the same as the American people. That they want peace just like we do. We all breathe the same air. Also, his acknowledgement that we're only 6% of the world's population and we need to act like it. So quit trying to impose an American solution on everybody. Trying to push our weight around, be bullies, basically. Then in November of 61, he fires the top 3 guys in the CIA as a result of Bay of Pigs. That's Dulles, Bissell, Cabell. We haven't got to this point yet, but Cabell's brother is the mayor of Dallas. Then he gives the UW speech in Seattle. And then we talked about the steel thing. He went against U.S. Steel in April 62, and all these big corporate heads are watching this. And he takes the side of the workers. And then when the corporations backstab him, double cross him, raise the rates, raise the prices anyway, boy, he puts the hammer down, and he uses military contracts as his leverage. And all these other corporate heads are looking at, and they're saying, "My goodness, if he does that to U.S. Steel, what would he do to us?" Then we have the Cuban Missile Crisis. Of course, in their view, he chickens out again. Instead of invading the island or bombing the bases. Then there's this discovery of this back channel that's taking place between him and Khrushchev. And now they're freaking out because they don't know what he's saying. It worked to end the Cuban Missile Crisis, but they don't give him credit for that. They don't give the back channel credit for that. They're not happy with the back channel. And then he gives his American University speech, the famous peace speech, in June of 63. In August of 63, we get the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which is a direct byproduct of the back channel, Khrushchev. Now they're furious because that's treason, right? He's giving away our nuclear advantage. So not only is he not going to launch a doomsday attack, now he's authorizing, banning above ground tests, underwater tests, things of that nature. So we're giving away our advantage. Then they find out in September of 63, he's not just back channeling with Khrushchev, he's back channeling with Castro. I mean, these are our 2 big enemies, Castro and Khrushchev. And Kennedy is working towards peace with both of them. But he's leaving all these important people, and they view themselves as the important people. They're the national security apparatus. That's who they are, and we're getting left out of the loop. We don't know. He's just doing diplomacy on his own over there. And then he issues National Security Action Memo 263, which says basically it's not going to be a Vietnam War in my second term. And they've been prepping for a Vietnam War for years. So it's not remember, I don't believe in coincidences. It's not a coincidence that he's assassinated right after that, less than a month later. It's also not a coincidence that it happened in a southern city. But LBJ was later quoted by Bill Moyers after the assassination, after he'd been sworn in. They're coming back to D.C. on Air Force One. Of course, they got the body of JFK in the back. And LBJ turns to Bill Moyers and he says, quote, "I wonder if the missiles are flying." Because LBJ knows, and we're going to get to LBJ, he knows a lot about all this and why it's happening and who's behind it. And he knows that this is a push by this deep state to have this war in Vietnam, to have this confrontation with the communist world. And so, he realizes I'm not really in control here either. I'm the face of the government. I'm the president. These deep staters, these shadow folks behind me, they're the ones really calling the shots. And if I don't go along, the same thing will happen to me, happen to JFK. So, here he is, commander in chief. He makes the decision whether we go to war or not. And he's questioning whether or not the missiles are flying, as if he didn't have control over any of that, because I think he realizes he doesn't. So this, I hope, answers the question. That's one of the things about Oswald, that the government never could get around the fact that they never produced a motive. It's motive, opportunity. You need those things to convince a jury that someone's guilty. Of course, there's not going to be a trial of Oswald, which is convenient. So they don't need to convince a jury. They just need to convince the American people. And so they make up these motives. But in a court, all those motives would have been shot down because it's clear he's not a Soviet puppet. He's not a Castroite. He's not a communist. He's not a Marxist-Leninist like they paint him out. He was sheep-dipped to be all those things. And they could never establish a motive. They couldn't say, well, he was a glory hound. Well, if he was, he wouldn't have run. He wouldn't have denied it. He would have, yeah, I did it. So that didn't work. The communist thing fell apart. Not immediately, but in the years subsequent, as we realized what was going on there. They just don't have a motive. The lone gunman people don't have a motive. And so they say, well, lone nut. He's just a nut. If he's a nut, he didn't have to have a motive. Nuts don't think like that. They just do things, stupid things. That's why they're nuts. I laugh because it's just so preposterous. And there are people, serious people. My dad went to his grave believing it, and my dad was a brilliant guy. But it's just borderline asinine. So they never had a motive. So what I've been trying to establish here is a motive. And I think that's a long list of motive right there. And none of this is off the record. It's all on the record if you just care to study each one of these events. And the reaction of the national security apparatus to Kennedy, the advice that they gave Kennedy was always opposite what he did. So they're just like, we can't work with this guy. He won't take our advice. The CIA saying he won't even ask our advice anymore. He doesn't trust us. So they begin to view him as the real threat. So then the second question that Oliver Stone posits in his movie is, who benefited? First question is, why was he killed? That speaks to motive. Second question is, who benefited? Well, look what happens in the aftermath of the assassination. The payoffs to the Leviathan, the beast that we've been feeding, this national security, what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. We call the military-industrial congressional complex, this beast that we've been feeding. The plan to shut down 73 bases went away. Vietnam War happened. In today's money, we spent over $1 trillion on Vietnam. The Cold War did not end in a Kennedy second term like his plan. It continued on to 91. In today's money, that was a $10 trillion outlay of cash. Remember, that it's all about the money and these spigots. They got to keep flowing. So 73 military bases staying open, that's a spigot of money. Vietnam War happening, that's a spigot of money. Cold War continuing, that's a spigot of money. And then the Pentagon spending, which has continued to go up, 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 up. We've seen that in previous episodes. I laid out the military spending pretty much by decade. And when Kennedy became president, the military spending was $47 billion a year. And now it's close to $1 trillion a year. My goodness. The spigots are just, however many spigots, they're all turned to full go. They're just blasting out money as fast, and we just don't have it, but it doesn't matter. We just borrow it or print it, right? And here's just a list of the wars that we have fought in this Cold War era, most of them since Kennedy. I mean, the only one before Kennedy was Korea. But you look at Vietnam, that goes on for 11 years. And that was greenlit days after Kennedy dies. Grenada, Beirut, Libya, Panama, Persian Gulf, #1, Somalia, Haiti, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, which is like Persian Gulf #2, Syria, and yes, Ukraine today, which isn't necessarily a head-to-head war, but it's a proxy war. And we're the ones propping up Ukraine. It's all our money. It's all our weapons. So that serves the same purpose. The only difference is our guys aren't dying yet. I say yet because who knows where they'll go. But the point is to be involved in a war somewhere so that these spigots continue to flow. The money gets sent over and laundered back to the people who sent it. The weapons get sent over, and then orders go out for new weapons to replace the ones we sent out. And the military-industrial congressional complex just rubs their hands in glee as the most profitable industry, the most profitable economic stimulus plan in the history of mankind is war. And boy, we've got really good. We used to be good at making things, cars, radios, televisions. Now we're good at war. We don't make things anymore. We buy it all from China. We sure do make war. That's our new industry. So been a payoff to the Joint Chiefs, the military-industrial congressional complex, which is this deep state. But there's also been a payoff to the CIA. They got rid of their chief antagonist, and 5 years later, they'll get rid of their other one, Bobby. National Security Action Memo 273 overrules 263. By the way, this was drafted on the day before JFK went to Dallas. McGeorge Bundy, who then was conveniently out of the country on the day JFK went to Dallas, drafted National Security Action Memo 273, which basically just reversed, did the opposite of what 263. Now, why would you do that? If you think that you're going to have the same, why would you even think you could present something like this to the president who just signed 263? What, do you think he's going to reverse himself in less than a month? It's preposterous. He did this. He prepared this in advance, knowing there's going to be a different president. And of course, he didn't do it himself. This was part of a cabal. That was his role. He just screwed up. He put the date on it. Then we have the fake Gulf of Tonkin resolution. You know, the whole point of taking care of Kennedy and replacing with LBJ, and then immediately having him sign National Security Action Memo 273 is to cause or create a pretext by which they can fight this war in Vietnam. And the pretext is going to be the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, or the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which we claim, oh, they're shooting at us. We find out later the incident never happened. It was all made up, but it was sufficient to get a war authorization from Congress under which the entire Vietnam War was fought. There was never a declaration of war. They didn't need one. They just got a war authorization. So then you go forward from that. The Cold War does not end. And I say, how does this benefit CIA? Well, Vietnam, in large part, was a CIA war. You know, the Cold War in Vietnam and to Laos, Cambodia, Nicaragua, Afghanistan, in large part these were CIA operations against the Soviets, against the communist bloc. And it continues into the 90s. And then when the Cold War ends and there is no more war and we have peace, the war industry is looking around, what do we do now? And conveniently, not long after, we get the war on terror. And we end up in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and the list never ends. You remember that famous speech, Bush, if you're not with us, you're against us. It's a long list of countries that fit that profile. And of course, outcomes of that are the Patriot Act, Homeland Security. This is all surveillance, all the powers of surveillance and all the things that we deal with on a daily basis now to protect us from terror. These are all, might as well just be cash payments and power grabs by the CIA to the CIA and power grabs by the CIA. I mean, they went from an endangered species under Kennedy to a monster today. The CIA has become a monster. And the line of demarcation was 1963, JFK dying. If JFK lives, who knows what the CIA is today? Maybe they're back to their original mandate. Who knows? But that didn't happen. So my question is, first of all, why was JFK killed? He gave the list. He became the threat to this deep state, this national security apparatus, and the corporate world that feeds it. He became the threat. So they took him out. What are the payoffs to the national security apparatus? Well, we'd be a permanent state of war is one. And then and as far as the CIA is concerned, all these measures here that increase the power, the budget, and influence of the CIA. If you want to get in even further, look at the payoffs to the military and CIA in terms of who our presidents are. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a quick effort I've researched it enough to be able to put this slide together, but I could do an entire slide presentation on each one of these, but we don't have time. So I'm just going to briefly mention each one. The president who succeeded Kennedy, LBJ, we've already seen, was a military and CIA puppet. And famously in that movie, he said, quote, "Just get me elected, I'll give you your damn war." Well, he did, right in the aftermath. I mean, within days, JFK's body's not even cold yet. And we've completely reversed his Vietnam policy. That war ate him alive. That's why he didn't run again in 68. But that wasn't a concern to the deep state. They just wanted the war. He gave them the war and sacrificed his war at home, which was to defeat poverty. We couldn't do both. The money that you would need to defeat poverty, we had to send overseas to fight Vietnam instead. So instead of the American people benefiting from a domestic policy, It came right out of their hides, and all that money went overseas instead. Then you follow up in 68, Nixon gets elected. This is the former head of the 5412 committee. This is the guy who ran all those covert ops in the 50s. This is the guy that created the S-Force. And as long as he continued his fight in Vietnam, everything went along pretty well. He gets reelected after he ended the war in Vietnam, and he almost immediately, Watergate happens. And if you go back and watch or rewatch the Watergate episodes, we established that whole thing was a setup. He was trying to negotiate the end of the Vietnam War, a permanent end. He was trying to establish détente with the Soviets and the Chinese. He went to the Soviet Union, he went to China. In other words, he's trying to end the Cold War. He's signing nuclear arms deals with the Soviets, SALT treaties. And so he became a threat. And they took him out. You say, well, no, he did that himself through Watergate. Go back and watch the Watergate episodes if you haven't already done so, and see how he was set up. The whole thing was to get him out. That's what they do with the threats. As long, in the first term, he was no threat. Vietnam continued right up to literally to October of 72 before the election. That's when the fighting stopped and they began negotiating after that. Well, when did Watergate happen? 72. After Nixon, you got Ford. Ford was the intelligence community's inside man. He was the FBI snoop. He leaked everything back to J. Edgar Hoover. And then after the Warren Commission produced its report, he became the most vocal defender of the cover-up, which was the Warren Report, which is how he ends up as vice president and later president after Nixon, because he's covered up once, he'll cover up again. He's already been compromised. And we couldn't have a trial in 63, and we can't have a trial of Nixon in 74, so we'll put Ford in there and he'll pardon him, and boom, it all goes away. Then we get to Carter. Now you notice there's two presidents in this on this slide that are highlighted in red. These are the two presidents that tried to do something about the CIA, and good things didn't happen to them. Carter appointed Stansfield Turner to be the director, and his whole effort was to reform the CIA. That was his intention. And he didn't last long. He was a one-termer. Then we get to Reagan and Bush. Nobody did better. Boy, you talk about the salad days. If you're the military and the CIA, Reagan and Bush are like your godfathers. We supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, the Contras in Nicaragua. These are all intelligence operations by the CIA. It got Reagan in some trouble, the Contras. And then we also had an unprecedented military buildup, including Star Wars, which is the nickname they gave for the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was really just an idea. It never really became functional. The military buildup under Reagan was unprecedented, which coincided with the 80s and good times in America. The economy just took off because the military industrial congressional complex, the beast, was being fed. Of course, Bush, in a lot of ways, was responsible for this. He was former head of the CIA, and he's Reagan's vice president. Behind the scenes, Bush had a lot of power. Well, then he transitions and becomes the next president. Here's the former CIA director, now in charge of the government, and he supervises a war in Iraq. Now, it's technically a UN action against Saddam Hussein when he invaded Kuwait. But it's their guy. It's the former CIA director in charge of the government. After Bush, you get Clinton. Clinton, during the Vietnam War, was a CIA asset. He was an informant. And he also partnered with the CIA in their drug running operation, which came in from outside the country, and they needed an airport. They needed an airport to land the drugs, and he gave them access to an airport in Arkansas, in Mena, Arkansas. One of the pilots that did all the flying in for the CIA was Barry Seal. And we've talked about Barry Seal before. He was in that original Operation 40 picture, along with Tosh Plumley, the two pilots that flew Operation 40 people around. Barry Seal was in that photo. Well, Barry Seal ends up being a pilot that's flying in a lot of these drugs into Mena, Arkansas, while the governor of Arkansas, Bill Clinton, lets it happen. He's working with the CIA. I'm sure he got compensated in some way, probably the presidency. I don't know. While he's president, we have wars in Yugoslavia and Africa, Somalia, Rwanda. Then we get Bush Jr., who's a funny story about how he got Cheney as his vice president. Cheney was, boy, he was just dug in like a tick in this national security apparatus. He used to be defense secretary, and he's involved in the big oil company, Halliburton. I mean, this guy is deep state as they come. And Bush, during the campaign, went to Cheney. He says, hey, give me a short list of people I could consider for my VP. Cheney comes back to him, I don't know, a month later. He says, I got your list. And he hands it to him. It's got one name on it. It's Cheney. Bush is like, what? What's this about? He says, I don't want to be president. I'll watch your back. You don't want somebody who might stab you in the back. I'll never do that. I'll protect you. And Bush picked him. And a lot of people suspect that Cheney was really the power behind that throne. And he leveraged his intelligence connections and his national security bona fides into this famous lie about weapons of mass destruction as justification for the Iraq War. And, you know, everybody kind of supported the Afghanistan war because that's where Osama bin Laden was hiding out after 9/11. But Iraq, we find out later, that was immediately on their radar screen to invade Iraq, kind of finish what Bush's daddy had started, but neglected to finish. And the question was, why? What's Iraq got to do with Osama bin Laden 9/11? Turns out he didn't have anything to do with it. But they sold this lie that he had or trying to develop weapons of mass destruction. Of course, we find out after years of searching, there were no WMDs in Iraq. It was all a lie, pretext. Cheney engineered that. And then, of course, during Bush and Cheney, we get, as a result of 9/11, the Patriot Act, Department of Homeland Security. This is all payoffs to this military-industrial congressional complex, this deep state, CIA surveillance. I never had it so good. All right, so then after Bush Jr. and Cheney, you get Obama. People don't realize who Obama is. His mom, his dad, his stepdad, his grandmother, and Obama himself are all CIA connected. Look it up. Yeah, it doesn't take long to discover the CIA connections in Obama's family run deep. A lot of it has to do with Indonesia and the goings on there, the covert ops that were going on there, and how Obama's family members, especially, were utilized in these covert ops. I just lost my battery. I'm going to have to move. So he's their guy. And then, of course, try to get a hold of Obama's college records, his transcripts. Try to get a hold of some of the records of Obama when he was young. You're not going to find them. They don't exist. Those transcripts, you know, other presidents, other men run for office, all that stuff becomes public information. You can't find it on Obama. It doesn't exist because it's been it's been expunged. It's been cleansed. His file's been cleansed. There are a lot of indiscretions in Obama's past that probably would have foreclosed on him ever becoming president. People wouldn't have voted for him. But because of his CIA connections, that stuff just got washed away. Washed away. So what happens when Obama's president? Well, we launch a drone assassination program, unlike anything we've ever had in our history. And he took it to a level we've never seen before. We don't even have to do covert ops anymore. We just fly drones around, target them. And then the spying, the surveillance here at home. We find out after Obama leaves office just how vast this spying program had grown. Part of the reason we found out about it was because of what happened to his successor, Trump, who is another one of these red highlights. Trump was not controlled by the intelligence apparatus. He was not controlled by this deep state. So he was a threat. And they've never stopped going to war against him. I mean, it started in 2016 when they invented this Russian collusion story, and they used all these intelligence connections. And we find out the original dossier that came from that Steele guy was paid by Hillary Clinton's campaign. And but it convinced the FBI, and they launched a counterintelligence operation against him, put bugs in Trump Tower, and fed the media. Boy, it launched a special prosecutor investigation. We find out later there's no evidence. It was all a hoax. But that's what happens when you become a threat to the intelligence apparatus or the deep state or the joint chief, the military, this national security apparatus. They viewed Trump as a threat. And so they impeached him twice, one of them over this Ukraine thing that now we're finding out it was perfectly legit. We're finding out, it's interesting. He was impeached over a phone call to the Ukrainian president about what his suspicions were that money was being laundered through Ukraine. Well, as soon as he loses his reelect, we end up in Ukraine and we're sending billions to Ukraine. I mean, it's the cause and effect. It's cause and effect. Then in 2020, when he's running for reelect, is that famous news article of all these intelligence heads who signed a letter saying the Hunter Biden story was all the laptop, it was all Russian misinformation. And now we know that wasn't true. It's just hit job after hit job after hit. I remember I was watching an interview and Chuck Schumer, he's the top Democrat in the Senate, was remarking, couldn't believe, shaking his head, I can't believe Trump is picking a war with the intelligence community, with this deep state. He said they have more ways than, I think he said there's more way, they have more ways than Sunday. I don't know. He says they have a million ways to get back at you. And he's just shaking his head. And it's true. It's happened. And it's happening today as we speak. Because the same guy's running again, and he represents the same threat now as he was then. And who was Trump replaced by? Biden, the longest serving chairperson of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in U.S. history. I mean, he's 81 years old, right? So he was in the Senate forever. He never held, as far as I know, a private sector job. And the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is a very important committee. And as the chairperson, you're the very person, because you oversee U.S. military and CIA. And now he's their guy. He's in the White House. So my point in saying all this or laying all this out, I'm not trying to be political here at all. I'm just saying these are all documented events or ties, is that we've not had a president since Kennedy that hasn't been connected to either the military or the CIA or both, or controlled by the military or the CIA or both, except for two. Carter wasn't, Trump wasn't, and bad things happened to both of them. Everybody else has been under the thumb. Everybody else owes, from day one. We already saw LBJ is on the plane flying back after he just took the oath of office, and he's already speculating about missiles flying because he knows he's not in charge. The military's in charge. The Joint Chiefs are in charge. The CIA is now in charge. The deep state is in charge. That's the payoff. Kennedy represented a threat to this deep state, reclaiming the authority, getting his hands back on the levers of power, which means the people are back in charge because they voted for him. None of these deep staters had been voted by anybody. That's why they're deep staters. They're in the shadows. They're in the background. They exercise all this power, all this authority. And the elected people are just their front men. They're stage characters. And then every now and then you get a guy come along who's not, or doesn't want to play their game. Jimmy Carter, Donald Trump. And I think they thought they could control Jimmy Carter. He was a novice when he was coming to D.C. He didn't have any D.C. ties. That was one of the reasons why the American people supported him. They were tired of insiders. They wanted to vote for an outsider. And they thought, well, we'll let him win. We'll play along. But as soon as he comes to Washington, we'll explain the facts of life to him. And he'll jump in line like everybody else. He'll fall in line. He didn't. With Trump, they just didn't think he would win. They were shocked. And so they've pulled out all the stops this time. They're not taking any chances this time. But they were shocked. They got caught by surprise. They really thought that Russian collusion thing would do it, man. Whether it was true or not didn't even matter. It was intended to sway votes in the 2016 election. And it just didn't work. American people didn't buy it. Enough of them anyway. And then, so they never let up to the 4 years he was president. It was just one, it started off with Russian collusion, which bled into a special prosecutor. I think the special prosecutor went on for 2-3 years. This noose hanging over his head. And really that was a trap too. That was just a trap to get him to somehow obstruct justice. There was no crime. They were in search of a crime, but they thought if they could just get him one time to tweet or to withhold a document, now we can charge him with obstruction of justice and impeach him. That was a trap. He's just smart enough not to fall into the trap. Then they impeached him over a phone call. Then they impeached him after he left office. What was that about? They impeached him after he left office so that he could never run again. And they haven't left him alone since because now he's running again. And who knows what will happen between now and election day. But he's a threat. So, and the guys that aren't a threat, they leave alone. They help him. Biden needed help. His son was getting him in trouble, so they came out and helped him. No, that's Russian misinformation. The court system, he had all kinds of tax problems. You and I would go to jail for the tax problems that Hunter Biden had. They let the time lapse, enough time go by that the charges went away. I forget what that's called. It's if enough time goes by in certain cases, you can't bring the case anymore. They let it expire so that they can't bring it. They help him. It reminds me of Watergate. Nixon didn't want to run against Muskie. Nixon didn't want to run against the other guy who got, I'm trying to remember his name. There were like 2 or 3 candidates that represented strong threats to Nixon. And they all, quote, self-destructed. Boy, but they left George McGovern alone. They wanted to run against George McGovern. So what happens here is all these forces and these elements of the deep state that have their hands on the levers of power help their candidate win. And then we as the American people think, oh, he won a legit election. And we voted for this guy. Well, anyway, I can go on, but this is the payoff. So the question is, number one, why was JFK killed? And we gave a long list of things that happened on his watch at this deep state, which, of course, remember now, we define the deep state as the national security apparatus and the corporations that feed it. It represented threats to them. And then the second question is, who benefited? That's pretty clear. I think I've probably beat a dead horse here about who benefited. So some conclusions. Jim Garrison said, quote, President Kennedy was killed for one reason, because he was working for reconciliation with the Soviet Union and Castro's Cuba. President Kennedy died because he wanted peace. He continues, in a very real sense, in a terrifying sense, our government is the CIA and the Pentagon, with Congress reduced to a debating society. He also said, he was quoting Huey Long, he said, fascism will come to America in the name of anti-fascism. I'm reminded of that every day when I hear currently that you have to vote for this particular candidate to save democracy. And they'll talk about how we have to censor opposing viewpoints in order to save democracy. It doesn't even make sense. It's an oxymoron. Censorship and democracy in the same sentence. Censorship to save democracy. That's what he's saying. Fascism will come to America in the name of anti-fascism. I'm afraid, this is Garrison now, based on my own experience, that fascism will come to America in the name of national security. Pennsylvania Senator Richard Schweiker told Robert Tannenbaum in December 1976, who was the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Tannenbaum was the House Select Committee on Assassinations Deputy Chief Counsel, and Senator Schweiker was talking to him, and he says, quote, in my judgment, the CIA was involved in the murder of the president. Tannenbaum in an interview later said, quote, the more we looked into it, this is the House Select Committee, the most productive area of investigation was clearly the CIA, namely those operatives who worked with the anti-Castro Cubans. We've already talked about Truman's warning in the op-ed that he wrote a month, literally exactly a month after JFK was assassinated, December 22. Quote, he said, for some time, I have been disturbed by the way the CIA has been diverted from its original assignment, which was collecting intelligence and reporting it to the president. It has instead become an operational arm of the government, covert or black ops. This has led to trouble and may have compounded our difficulties in several explosive areas. In short, what we've learned about the CIA is it is equivalent to a branch of the government. It has no legislative limits. You know, with the three branches of government, there's limits. You know, the legislative branch makes law. It doesn't interpret law. The judicial branch interprets law. And neither one of those enforce law. The executive branch enforces law. They all have their own job descriptions. They serve defined terms, whereby you have to run for re-election. If you're a congressman, it's 2 years. If you're a senator, it's 6. Yet there's age requirements. There's all kinds of limits to what our branches of government, other than what they're allowed to do. There's implied powers. There's explicit powers. You can't do this. You can't do that. There's nothing in the CIA that says they can't do anything that they want. They ignore presidential orders all the time. We've seen it. You know, Kennedy says, stop, cease and desist all orders against Cuba. William Harvey says, ignore him. William D. Pauly, they just ignore him and they continue to launch their operations. They refuse to respond to court decisions. They just dare the court to do something about it. They exempt themselves from working with or being accountable to others. The House Select Committee tried to get documents, and they just ignore. They just, if they do turn them over, they Everything's redacted. It's worthless. They hide behind sources and methods. The CIA for years has been fighting release of the JFK files behind sources and methods. We don't want our sources revealed. They're all dead, but they still hide behind it. Methods. Why? Because they still use the same methods and they don't want to have to create new ones. These have worked too good, too well. They have their own Air Force, which they've used to bomb countries. They did in Afghanistan. They've done it in Syria for years. MK Ultra is an example of the CIA committing unspeakable crimes against humanity. And no one ever got held accountable for that. No one went to jail for it. Nobody in the CIA ever pays a price for the things that they do. So that they're just completely unaccountable. Until somebody like JFK comes along. And when he starts to try to introduce accountability, they get their panties in a wad. They say, well, who do you think you are? When he decides to end the war in Vietnam, National Security Action Memo 263, when he decides to dismantle the CIA and he's going to rebuild it, like Truman intended, he's going to put Bobby in charge of it. They're like, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. And so, in their view, this fourth branch, CIA, assassinating JFK became a necessity to maintaining business as usual. And of course, they've become experts in this. They had a program already launched called Executive Action. They'd already taken care of several world leaders. Now, the Castro thing wasn't working out too good, but it wasn't for lack of trying. They have expertise in this. So what would prevent them from taking an overseas program, turning it domestic, which we saw with ZR Rifle? They just created another assassination program for an American target. And they laid they created the cover story. They got the patsy in place. They recruited the people. They had the layers of documents to protect them, steer everybody away, to divert attention away from what was really going on. And then on the day JFK came to Dallas, Dallas might as well have been a CIA town. It was crawling with all these CIA connected, like Tannenbaum said, all these CIA people that were part of the anti-Castro operations, just crawling with them. You got planes at the airports that brought all these people in. Tosh Plumley's there. We found out that Jerry Cobb was there. She had a plane loads of people. And here comes Kennedy in his open top car, just like the Gaulle. No bubble top. We're going to find out he had no Secret Service protection either. He's completely exposed. He's being led like a lamb to the slaughter. I like what Oliver Stone said in his movie. It was a turkey shoot. It was literally a turkey shoot. It was all set up, which is why de Gaulle recognized it for what it was. He said, this is security services. And then in the aftermath, the third question is who had the power to cover it up? Well, you got the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover's coming out right away saying, it's a lone gunman. You got Katzenbach with his famous memo. They get Jack Ruby to clean up on aisle 4, take care of the accused assassin. They launch the cover story. They have a few glitches. The Mexico City thing falls apart in their face. But then they appoint a Blue Ribbon Commission because they got the president under their control. He appoints the Blue Ribbon Commission, and they put Alan Dulles, the fox, in charge of the hen house. And to keep J. Edgar Hoover apprised of everything, they insert or integrate Gerald Ford into the commission. And they immunize themselves, just like ultravires, from any accountability. None of their assets are liable. None of their profits are liable. There's no personal liability. It's beautiful. It was beautiful. And it's taken us 60 years to unwind this. And by now, all the perps are dead. And America, and this is what Charles de Gaulle said, he says, Americans don't want to know. And there's still a lot of us out there that don't want to know. And so we're living a lie. The country is living a lie. And the lie has compounded over the years, over the decades. One lie upon another upon another. It's a house of cards, and if the truth ever prevails, the whole house of cards is going to come down. So they protect the lie. That's why you don't see academic research into the JFK assassination. That wouldn't protect the lie. And there's a lot of money at stake. There's a lot of industry at stake. There's a lot of people, high-ranking positions, that are making sure the lie continues. Wow, that went on for a while. We have concluded Conspirator 1. And I hope, and certainly feel free to comment, let me know if you think I did a decent job trying to establish a motive, number one, opportunity, number two, answer these three questions. Why was he killed? Who benefited? Who had the power to cover it up with respect to the deep state? I started off by defining the deep state, and I hope if you don't remember anything else, I hope you remember the definition of the deep state. I've said it over and over again. The national security apparatus and the corporations that feed it. That is my conspirator number one. And I have 5 of these conspirators. So we got 4 more to go. The other 4 are not as in depth as this one. This one, I had to go all the way back to the Civil War to start that. So pretty in depth, but we'll start with the conspirator number 2 tomorrow. I think that'll be episode 80. This is episode 79. So hope you enjoyed today. I enjoyed talking about it. And and I enjoy listening or reading your comments as well. Feel free to check out my website, sphistory.com. Feel free also to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell, hit the thumbs up, keep the comments coming. And it's just heartening to know that there are other people out there in this country that still care about the truth. And there is no such thing as my truth or your truth. There's just truth. Nobody owns it. I don't own it. You don't own it. It's just truth. And that's all we're trying to do is get to the truth. All right. Until tomorrow, hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.